First up this morning, please welcome the Majority Leader of the West Virginia State Senate, Senator Ryan Ferns, a Republican from Ohio County. Senator, good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Hoppy. How are you?
I'm well. Good to talk to you. Do you have any idea? Do you know? Have you gotten any heads up on exactly what the governor will propose tomorrow night?
I have not, and we're anxiously awaiting, that speech tomorrow night for that reason. We've heard a lot of, as you have, and you mentioned a lot of different possibilities for that. During his campaign, he obviously alluded to not raising taxes. And I've seen reports from your media sources, that he's planning on making cuts. But I've also heard, recently here within the Capitol, I got in a couple of days ago, that maybe he's backing away from some of those cuts. So we're just, the legislature is anxiously waiting to hear what it is that the governor is going to propose for his budget.
Do you expect to hear, and again, it's just conjecture here because we don't know, we've heard things, the governor's keeping things close to the vest. Do you expect to hear tomorrow night that the governor is going to try to make up that shortfall almost entirely with cuts and maybe some money from rainy day and maybe a little this and a little that? Or do you expect to hear the governor say something to the effect of, this is a lot worse than I thought. We really can't cut $500 to $600 million. We've got to raise tax A or tax B or tax C. Which do you expect? What do you expect to hear?
Well, I'm hopeful that he will adhere to the promises that he made related to making cuts. But if you're asking what I expect to hear, I expect him to come out and say that despite that's what the commitment that he made to the people of West Virginia, that ultimately raising taxes is what he's going to have to do in his budget.
And what do you think is going to be the reaction of you and other Republicans in the Senate if that's the case?
Well, it'll be extremely disappointing because, as I mentioned several times, both in his campaign and since he's been our governor, he has said that the people of West Virginia can't handle raising taxes anymore, and that was not something that he intended to do. The people had enough taxation, and so it'd be extremely disappointing for him to make those commitments and then to come out tomorrow and say, I'm going to have to, on day one of this legislative session, I'm going to have to go back on the promises that I made.
Senator Majority Leader Ryan Ferns is with us, Republican, Ohio County. So, Senator, let's turn this the other way. What if he comes out and says that, and I realize these are hypotheticals, but these are the things being talked about, that we're going to cut $600 million out of the budget. And to do that, we're going to eliminate these agencies. We're going to close these colleges. We're going to lay off this many state workers. That's when people really get the idea of what those cuts mean. Can you be all in on those kinds of cuts?
Well, I'd have to see what the cuts are. I mean, again, we're talking sort of in general here.
Yeah, it's hypothetical.
I get that. Yeah, for sure, any cuts are going to be challenging, and that's why ultimately in the history of our state, in recent history especially, that they've always just resorted to raising taxes because making cuts are difficult. But I would have to evaluate each of those, and I certainly think that in general, I'm of the opinion that our state has grown while our government has grown while our population has shrunk. So there's certainly room for downsizing in some areas, and we've looked at that the past couple of years in the legislature too. As the past couple of years I was chairman of the Health Committee, and we started streamlining the certificate of need process and looked at the relevance of the Healthcare Authority as one of those entities that's sort of just been floating out there that for years we've heard is really unnecessary and inefficient, and so there's certainly areas for opportunities. I would just have to evaluate what the governor is going to propose.
Yeah, I understand. I think what's going to happen, Ryan, is that and the governor, whoever proposes cuts of $500 to $600 million, those are real cuts. That stuff's going to have to go away. People are going to have to get laid off. Things are going to have to shut down because you're talking about 10 to 15% of the state budget. So that's real. Those are real dollars.
Absolutely.
What about, and again, there's discussion on the Senate side at least about tax reform. There's a committee specifically appointed to work on tax reform. How much traction, if any, do you think the Senate will have on reforming the tax code, and within that, getting rid of many or most of the exemptions to the sales tax and also lowering the rate? Is there any buzz about that before this session begins on the Senate side?
There absolutely is. As a matter of fact, Hoppy, we just had a meeting this morning, with some of the members of leadership in the Senate, and it was one of the biggest topics that we discussed. And it's my belief, as well as the belief of many of my colleagues and the Senate President, it's one of the most significant things that we can hope to accomplish as a legislature. And for the past 2 years, the Republican majority in the legislature has set us on a path for economic prosperity, and our tax code does not currently fit in with that goal. And so restructuring that top to bottom, a complete overhaul, I think will be one of our top priorities. And it's not just fluff to create this committee, make it a standing committee during this legislative session. It's because it is one of our top priorities.
Mm-hmm. Now, if the goal is, Ryan, to eliminate a lot of those exemptions, those sales tax exemptions, and lower the rate, you're really zeroing out on it's flat. You're not going to bring in any additional revenue. I mean, that's the goal, is to make it revenue neutral. So if you do that, with the anticipation that maybe in the long term or not too distant future, there'd be some economic growth and some increased tax revenue from that. But if you do that, you don't solve that immediate budget problem. Is that a fair assessment? And then how does that fit into this whole equation of trying to balance the budget?
Well, it's possible to fit into that equation, and it doesn't necessarily. I mean, there's a whole variety of methods at which we could do this overhaul, and we've contemplated some ways that maybe in the short term we're able to help plug this budget hole with the anticipation that down the road it'll be more sustainable. So I wouldn't take that completely off the table to say that it'll necessarily be completely revenue neutral in the first year. I think there is an opportunity, to have it while at the same time that we are restructuring the tax code for economic prosperity, that we also are helping balance the budget.
Ryan, and we're talking with Ryan Ferns, a Republican, Ohio County, who's the Senate Majority Leader. Ryan, let me go back for a moment to what the governor might say tomorrow night. And again, we're dealing with hypotheticals. I get that. So we need to be pretty cautious about that. But if, in fact, as some have suggested, that he proposes a 1% increase in the consumer sales tax, or bringing back part of the food tax, or something like that, a broad-based tax that brings in $200 million, would that be DOA in the Senate, or would Senate leadership say, well, look, we got a problem, everything's on the table, let's hash that out? I mean, is the door closed completely on any new tax increase?
I think that the Republican leadership in the House and the Senate are both of the opinion that the people of West Virginia have been taxed enough, and that I think that any tax increases without a significant look at downsizing the government, making it on par with our population, the services that are needed, I think would be off the table.
Do you think you can find $500 to $600 million?
We are focused on our agenda that we've been pursuing for the last 2 years. That the governor is going to propose this, and to be honest with you, Hoppy, we're anxiously awaiting to see what path he takes with those cuts.
All right, got it. Ryan Ferns, who's a Republican from Ohio County and the Senate Majority Leader. And Ryan, it's good to speak with you. We'll see you at the Capitol. Okay.
Thank you very much, Hoppy.
Good to talk to you.